In this video, we're walking through different ways to speed up your development in Bubble because it's really easy for progress to slow down to a frustrating cycle of constant delays. These best practices will help you stay on task and actually completing your features on time instead. Our first best practice may sound obvious, but you'd be surprised how many folks jump into development without it. And that's to go into your work with a plan, and not just any plan, but a realistic one. Doesn't matter what type of application you're building, doesn't matter what you're building on. Having a plan is going to help you stay focused. What exactly is it that you want to achieve with your application? You want to think about what your goals are in the short term versus in the long term, because that will help you prioritize what you need to work on now versus later. The last thing you want to do is tackle everything all at once. That's just going to slow you down. It's going to lead to a lot of decision paralysis. So get very, very clear about what it is you need to accomplish and the phases of your overall roadmap. You want to be realistic with the timing. What other responsibilities do you have outside of your application? How much time do you truly have to dedicate on a daily or weekly basis towards the app? Are you learning at the same time? Make sure that you leave breathing room for that as well. Keep your work focused on fewer features at a time because it will lead to less distractions and allow you to actually complete things more efficiently. And this should go without saying, but try to stick to the plan and be disciplined with it as much as possible. The less you deviate from the plan, the more likely it is you're going to achieve your milestones on time. All right, so you've put together your big picture plan. How does this actually translate to the day-to-day work you're going to put in to actually build the application? And not just build it, but build it quickly. What you want to do is break your plan down and organize it by user stories. Yes, we're still organizing here. I promise the more prepared you are ahead of time going into development, the more efficient that development is going to be on the other side. Keep in mind, Bubble doesn't know what you're building, so it's not going to tell you how to put together your app. Once you've identified your unique user stories, you've now created these mini guides that you can follow. This will help reduce any decision fatigue as well as keep you hyper-focused on one flow at a time. And the idea here is that you build things in the order that your user will encounter them. So for example, most applications will typically require users to have an account. So by addressing the user onboarding experience first, you've just laid out that first step for them, right? The sign up form, the login form, any password resets that can very easily lead you into just general account management functionality. Not only that, but now everything you do going forward from here, you can actually test as a user. And if you have different user roles that you need to implement, this is the time to address it, right? So this sequence honestly can make a huge difference in your development speed. The last thing you want to do is just randomly tackle features without a plan. Imagine building a whole checkout experience before building the storefront, right? A checkout would need prices, it would need selected products that are added to the cart. If you don't have those things beforehand, you don't really have a lot to work with to complete that checkout experience. So help yourself by following a more logical sequence, and typically that's going to be following the user's experience throughout the application. Yes, of course, things will intersect. You may need to work on a few things simultaneously to complete the flow, but keep these sequences in mind to reduce your own time spent on each feature. The next area that you can be strategic in is in testing and documentation. Now, this is more of a preventative maintenance approach, right? To reduce the overall time spent in the application. Testing and documentation should be something that's routine. So just like with a vehicle, you want to stay on top of your battery, your brake pads, your fluids, right? You go in for regular checkups so that you don't end up with a bigger, more expensive problem and headache down the road. So you want to routinely check in on your application. You want to test as you go and address issues as you go so that they don't build up and create a much larger problem later down the line. Bubble has an issue checker that's collecting issues of things that are not technically configured properly. Tackle them as soon as you possibly can. Don't let them build up. There's many reasons for that. Number one, it'll allow you to move through your application more efficiently. You'll be able to test a cleaner app every single time. Addressing one issue will also teach you, the underlying problem so that you can actually avoid it for the future and you run into less issues overall. So don't let those build up because we've often seen folks just kind of set them aside if they're not directly related to a page that they're working on, but they can actually have an effect on the app as a whole. And also, when you're testing your features, do more than just previewing the page to confirm the one thing that you did. Actually go back to the beginning of the user story and run through the flow from start to finish, you'd be surprised how much of a ripple effect a slight change to a data structure or a condition, some expression, has, on many other elements that may seem unrelated. Okay, so give yourself many opportunities to confirm that things are always still working, even with slight adjustments. When it comes to working with test data, especially in the early parts of your development, keep your sets of data small. It's very easy to make mistakes early on in your logic, and you have to reset your data. So if you're uploading hundreds of records only to have to reset it, delete it all, and then re-upload it again, you're just wasting workload units, right? You're consuming a lot of workload for no reason. So keep your test data small, enough to give you enough variety to see that the feature is working properly. And then once things are locked down, you can expand from there. So this, again, you want to be very methodical with every step that you take, but creating these good habits of, preventative maintenance around the application so that you avoid bigger problems down the line. Now, on top of this, you can also be documenting important areas of your app, and this is going to serve you in many ways. For future reference, if you ever need to come back into the app to improve a feature or change it in some way, you actually have notes that you've taken for yourself to remind you how the logic was put together, what things that you need to keep in mind in case there's another ripple effect that could happen, right? This is very common for applications that have been built and, they go on for months without any changes. Then somebody comes in and needs to make an adjustment. It's very easy to forget the logic that went into it. So document your work so that nobody gets lost, especially if you're working with other people. You want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and nobody makes any silly mistakes due to a miscommunication. Actually taking the time to put in these preventative measures can truly make a world of difference in time savings, because in the world of development, code or no code, things can multiply very, very fast. Now, when it comes to building on Bubble, you want to take the time to learn and understand all of the core concepts you need for building a data-driven, dynamic, and interactive application. Just because it's no code does not mean you can drag and drop your way to a custom application. Far from it. You still have to create custom instructions for Bubble to carry out your functionality and designs. So go through these concepts so that you're not stumbling your way through the logic, you're not going through more trial and error than is necessary and slowing yourself down. The first concept is around data management. It is up to you to create your own custom database architecture. And so you need to make sure you understand what it means to create different data types, fields with specific formats, option sets, relating records to one another, right? There are many ways that you can actually organize data in a custom structure, but some approaches may be far more efficient than others. And the last thing you want to do is create something that's bloated and have your features built in an unstable environment. Once you have your database organized, well, now you need to work with it. You're going to be manipulating your data, searching your data, referencing it in many, many different ways throughout your designs, your workflows, your various dynamic expressions. So it's important you also understand the various forms of manipulation and reformatting that you can do with your data. This is ultimately what allows you to create a personalized experience, one that's very automated and custom for your users. And if you're not really sure what your options are, again, you're just going to be stumbling your way through those features, going through a lot of rework and moving in circles to accomplish simple things. There's another core data concept, which is passing data around between visual elements or between pages, right? Sending data from one place to another. You'd be surprised how often, how frequent this comes up in a variety of features. Think of any kind of selection feature that a user might go through. They're selecting users to add to a project. They're selecting products to add to a shopping cart. Or if something is being tracked as the user moves through the app, right? Being able to send information from one place to another is a concept that can be addressed in many different ways. There's lots of different tools for it. Some, again, are more appropriate than others. So this concept of passing data between elements, between pages, is another important one to understand. Navigation is the next concept here, and this is something that you'll likely be addressing early on in your development. When you're building an app on Bubble, one of the first decisions you need to make is whether you want to build a multi-page application or a single-page app. These two different styles will have different approaches for moving users between screens. And navigation has other logic that can come with it too. Moving data from one place to another. You may need to see if the user is restricted from accessing a certain screen, so they may need to be redirected. Not to mention, the style of navigation may dictate how you design your menus. So this is absolutely a concept that you need to understand early on, because it'll help you actually move between your own pages when you're previewing it. And of course, you want to give your users a great experience moving through your app. The next important concept is understanding how different user roles can change behavior, change designs, and even logic in your application, right? At a very base level, just considering the difference between a logged in user versus a logged out user. What do they have access to? What can they see? What pages can they get to? What data can they work with? Take that one step further, working with any custom roles that you've built into your data structure, right? You need to make sure that you know how to address all of the different scenarios. And if you're not thinking of those things ahead of time, you could very easily miss different scenarios where users could find themselves in a place they're not supposed to be in. You could have data leaking to users, which could become a security problem. So make sure that you do understand the concept of different user roles accessing pages, accessing data, accessing functions. Another thing that's important to understand in Bubble is that everything you create is an instruction. This is a very logic-based type of system. You have to tell Bubble what you want it to do in terms of functions in the workflows or visual appearances and properties, right? Everything from colors and font sizes to how to reformat a date that's coming from your database, and many, many other things around that. Okay, so if you understand what options are available to you, all the different variables that you can put together to create these instructions, you'll have a much better time, much easier time putting the logic together overall. And there are conditions that you can create to change your own logic to do different things under different scenarios. You have control over the timing of sequences as well, right? So there's major components around creating your custom logic to create the exact experience that you're looking for. So make sure that you do understand these core components. And finally, designing the front end pages of your application also comes with its own set of best practices and tools and options that you can work with. You want to be clear on even just basic page layout principles, such as designing on a grid, right? That keeps things very neatly organized, much more legible for your user. So considering, what's going to keep your user oriented, what's going to make things really easy to understand for them, and understanding basics like where it makes sense to have menus, how to create visual hierarchy, right? How to create proper spacing between things. All of this can be a huge time saver if you go in with these basic principles in mind, rather than just kind of randomly throwing things onto the canvas. Hey, real quick, if you're finding this helpful, we've put together a complete guide to help you figure out whether Bubble is right for your app. You can check it out over at coachingnocodeapps.com/bubble-guide. I've also put the link in the description below. As you can see, this guide walks through everything from pricing to performance, IP ownership, and more. Head to coachingnocodeapps.com/bubble-guide to get immediate access. Now let's talk about some best practices that you can put in place as you work inside of the Bubble editor. The first is just to maintain a clean and organized space for yourself. This is going to help you move through the editor much more quickly, right? You're not constantly opening up the wrong thing or getting mixed up with things. You're not having to hunt for items within your editor. It's very easy for things to add up quite quickly. The deeper you get into development, the more complex your features get. So make sure you have clear and consistent labels with everything. This goes for your visual elements, like your inputs and buttons and text, things that you typically reference in order to trigger workflows or to reference for data sources, your workflow events and your actions, your naming system for your entire data structure. Make use of workflow folders and color coding your events. If you have a page with a lot of workflows, these tools can help you stay more organized and make things easier to find, which in turn allows you to move through your work a lot faster. Make sure to periodically remove anything that you're not using. This goes for pages, for elements on your pages, plugins, anything that is no longer serving your application, get rid of it. Again, this stuff can add up very quickly and it's just going to get in your way. Make use of styles in your application. This is a feature within Bubble that is meant to help you stay incredibly consistent with your overall appearance properties. It can help you stick to your branding guidelines if there's specific color palettes that you need to stick to, your fonts, the font sizes. All of this can be organized in one central location within the styles, and that way it makes it easier for you to apply those properties with just a single click rather than having to reconfigure every individual element. Not to mention, styles are more efficient for Bubble to load compared to loading up all of the individual properties across separate elements. So you're actually improving your application's performance and optimizing things. Next, take advantage of Bubble's responsive engine. This is a system that can help your layouts adapt to different screen sizes, right? Every layout is not necessarily going to be universal for, an ultra wide monitor compared to a small smartphone. You do have to take these different widths into account and have things shift around. In some cases, maybe even switch to different designs that are better suited for that screen. So the responsive engine has a lot of controls where you can, dictate the spacing between items, how things are distributed evenly on a page, but it does encourage you to position things on a grid, which is naturally going to help you create cleaner, more legible layouts, right? In a combination of rows and columns. Definitely take advantage of this. Not only is this going to help you put your designs together a lot faster, but it's also going to give your users a much more useful experience. I mean, responsive design is practically expected these days, so you don't want to miss out on that. Next, Bubble has plenty of tools throughout the editor to help you reduce redundancy in your work. This way, you don't need to spend any more time than you really need building things from scratch. The first is the reusable element, and this is here precisely to avoid rebuilding the same things over and over and over again on multiple pages. A really common example of this is a header element, where typically we find our navigation system, right? Our menus. So if multiple pages need to see the exact same header, the exact same navigation system, this is a great use case to create a reusable element for that. And this is kind of like a global element where you build and you design it once. You can also attach workflows to it, and then you add instances of that element on multiple pages. If you need to make an adjustment, you only do that once and it will reflect automatically throughout all of those instances. The next item is the custom event. Now, custom events have many different use cases, but one of them is that since they're triggered by other workflows, you can have multiple trigger points that ultimately need to trigger the same set of actions funnel into the same custom event. This way, you don't have duplicates of the same sequence of actions, again, creating some risk of inconsistencies and different behaviors. Use a custom event to serve as this sort of central location for the same sequence that multiple trigger points need to go to. Not only is it going to save you time, but it's also going to ensure that the behavior is the exact same no matter what. Now, the next item is the database trigger. This is a type of backend workflow, so this is server side, where it's waiting for a change to occur in the database, and then when that change happens, it'll trigger a sequence of actions. And because this is server side, you can really create a lot of powerful automations here. The database change does not necessarily need to be triggered by a user on a page. It could be triggered by an API connection that you have with a third-party service. But this is similar to the example with the custom events, where if you had multiple trigger points, changing the database, then this one consolidated sequence of actions can run because of it. That way it saves you time from having to build multiple instances of the same flow and ensure consistency. Now, the next item is a lot simpler, but could make a huge difference in the amount of time you spend designing things, and that is in the alert message. If you have a page with a lot of different messages that could be displayed, you can set up an alert as a template, right? One alert element with a particular design, right? It's got certain colors and everything. You position it in a certain spot. But in the workflows, when you go to show the alert, you can dynamically change the message. This way, you don't need to create multiple alert elements, ensuring that they're styled in the same way, right? That they're positioned in the same spot. Obviously, there are different use cases where having separate elements makes more sense, but this is an area where, because you have this ability to dynamically change the message, take advantage of that. And finally, one of the most widespread capabilities that'll help you reduce time spent in the editor are all of the copy and paste operations that Bubble has everywhere. You can copy and paste almost everything. So if you right click throughout your canvas, if you right click on your expressions, on your data types, in your privacy rules, you'll typically find a menu that will allow you to paste. And by duplicating that thing, you've already saved yourself a handful of clicks compared to building things from scratch. So I encourage you to explore everywhere in the editor where you can create things, right click it to see what copy and paste options are available to you. Now, I want to want to go over a few tactics that we've picked up and have even shared with our own clients because we found they do a great job of reducing time spent in the editor. The first is coming up with a system for where you're going to place your custom state. A custom state is like a temporary field that you can place in your page. And because you can technically add it to any visual element on your page, it's really easy to lose track of them. Some people like to place all of their custom states at the page level. Some people like to place them on container elements that are relevant to the feature the custom state is serving. Whichever system works best for you is the one that you should go with, but make sure that you're consistent with it throughout your entire application. Try not to mix and match approaches, otherwise you'll just end up getting lost. You're going to end up spending time looking for that state. So create a system that's going to make it easy for you to remember and easy for you to use throughout your work. The next tactic is to use emojis in all of your custom labels. Anywhere you have the ability to customize the name of something, your types, fields, option sets, your visual elements, your workflow folders, your page folders, all of that, you can actually insert emojis into it. And it makes a huge difference actually in being able to very quickly identify things in your entire editor. Not to mention in your data structure, because Bubble automatically sorts everything alphabetically, putting an emoji at the front of the name can resort things and help you group your data types together that serve, similar features, for example. So it gives you a slightly different way of organizing. Another tactic is to add prefixes for some of your field labels. This is again to help you identify things as fast as possible. Whenever you're creating your dynamic expressions, if you can immediately identify and understand what the format of that value is going to look like, then you know exactly what operators are available, you know what expression you can build with it. It'll also tip you off if you need to maybe update your structure if something's not available. So a couple of examples where prefix can help with this identification. Adding something like OS in front of the name would make it really easy for you to understand, okay, this is linked to an option set choice or maybe a list of choices rather than just a regular text, name, or date. If you have a field that's actually a relationship to another record, we like to use the word related or maybe linked, and then the name of the thing that you're working with. We also like to indicate whether a field can accept multiple values. Okay, so we're talking about list fields here. So a simple way is just to pluralize your label. If you want to be even more obvious, you can label it something like list of team members or list of users, right? And notice how all of these tactics are just about helping yourself. You're creating a system that's going to make it easier for you to identify things that you've created. And as long as you're consistent with it, then it's going to become second nature for you. And you'll automatically look for, these particular identifiers when you're ready to move on to your next feature. And the last tactic I want to share with you is to periodically reset your test data. That usually just means clearing everything out and starting fresh with blank tables. The deeper you get into development, the more likely it is that your logic has changed and the way things are being saved to your database has evolved. So some of the earlier test data that was generated is not exactly aligning with how current test data is generated. And that can lead to issues with your testing. You could end up with bad data in the database. Now, I'm just talking about the development database, of course, and this is really just while you're still working out all of your features, making things are functioning properly, and you're locking things down. But it is a good habit to get into every once in a while to just kind of reset things, start fresh, and go through your testing processes from the beginning of your user stories, moving all the way through, just making sure that no ripple effects have occurred to create other problems that went undetected. All right, everything I've gone over today, I know it sounds obvious and it sounds easy, but it actually is quite difficult to keep up with in a really disciplined way. Moving through your editor, moving through your work fast has much more to do with having a consistent strategy, being organized, being informed, being prepared, than it does with shortcuts and cheat codes. You're certainly not going to shortcut your way to a custom application. So let this be a reminder that slow and steady actually does win the race here. All right, I hope this was helpful, and if it was, the content you're about to see on the next screen will help you take things even further.